Sreejith, welcome to Bags2Riches. Really appreciate you taking off some time. How are you doing this Sunday morning?
I'm doing great, Jainesh. Yeah, I'm just now trying to remember. So you said bags to riches. I don't know if I fit there, but I think today we'll try to explore the computer system validation, which is the area I work on, and maybe share some insights as well as some of the stories around it, which has helped me grow as well as my students. So I think that's what we will focus today, right?
Absolutely, yeah, that is the perfect introduction. And since the listeners on my channel, they vary a bit, all the way from early professionals to late executive directors. I want to learn from you if you were to describe CSA and CSV in layman terms, how would you describe them?
Okay, let's start with CSV. It is computer system validation, or generally known as validation. Basically, it is a process in which you make sure something is working as expected. That's the simplest definition of it. But the idea behind it is, let me give you as an example, right? So let's say, since we are in life sciences, you know what is a quality management system, right?
Yeah.
So it is a software used to store data, right? And the
Hmm.
regulated data, sometimes GXP data, right? And we can dive into that later. But the idea of validation is, you write your requirements, test it, record it, show the documentation or evidence that these requirements are
Hmm.
working as expected. That is the goal of validation. So computer system validation is a term which, is used to describe the work which we do. And the second term, which you mentioned, computer software assurance, is a relatively new term, but it is nothing but a risk-based approach to computer system validation. So one misconception I want to quickly clarify, if your listeners don't know this, right? Most people talk about CSA, which is a new thing which came in 2022. FDA just released the final guidance, which is just a couple of months back, September of 2025. Doesn't replace CSV. Okay, I think if I can clarify that, CSA is just a risk-based approach of doing computer system validation. What it replaces is, there is we call it a Bible document for computer system validation, which is a, you know, 20 years back document called General
Mm,
Principles of Software Validation, GPSV.
mm,
Okay. In that, there's a section 6, which talks about how to do validation. So that particular section 6 is being replaced by the new guidance document, which came a couple of months back. So that is how
got
we
it.
want to understand, maybe like a parent and child, right? Because we have the industry has transformed, we are into talking more about AI and other stuff, right? And cloud
Hmm.
tools. The new way of doing computer system validation, risk-based, compared to traditional model,
Right.
computer software assurance. So that's why you hear this term a lot these days in the industry, CSV to CSA, and that's one big transformation happening across all the industry, like three industries like pharmaceutical, big device, and biotech.
Got it. That's a really good overview. So when you say we are moving more towards now CSA, that is risk-based assessment of systems, what was unsustainable in the CSV industry before that we have led to this change?
I'll tell you my own story, right? So I started this industry in 2007 when I came to US for the first time, right? And I was, I did my computer science, but
Hmm.
I was more doing development work before. And then I was introduced to this concept where I came to as a consulting to set up a testing center of excellence. So that point of time, I was doing mostly testing projects or validation. So that time, it was more about, okay, paper documentation. So we used to run a project, and I had an India offshore team. They would, print out test cases and write pass or fail and sign it. And then I used to get bundles of FedEx from India. So I was kind of a mailman who used to collect these FedEx copies and run around the quality departments in my company. So
Mm,
that part of that, it was paper heavy, right? So that is why. And the other thing about it was we treated all the requirements as equal. So there was no, the risk based approach is not new, but the difference is that not many companies were practicing that. And one
mm,
of the key reason was, we always look for prescription from agencies like FDA and EMA, right? But agencies never give you prescription. Like they don't
Mm,
give you how to do. They always say what, right? It's called predicate rule or regulations. They'll say, hey,
mm,
if you're doing this, you need to meet this. How you do, it's up to you.
right.
Because the industry was, more I would say compliance based that point of time. So we were trying to make sure, hey, we are not missing something, right? So with that fear in mind, we used to treat every requirement equal and create test cases. So it became a big paper mountain, if you will. So that
Mm,
was the approach, at least in my and most of the professionals in the last 15 years or so. And then recently, when cloud, and those times we used to have all softwares in house, right? In on
right.
premise. When AWS and cloud and all those transformation happened in the last decade or so, most of the software infrastructure started moving to cloud, right? So we wanted a better approach. That's when
Mm,
we started moving from paper to digital, right? And all the new things or the new tools or the new, including AI, which you're hearing these days, are all
yep.
part of that transformation where we are moving from documentation heavy approach to a
Mm,
risk based approach.
right.
um, why we are focusing on risk? Because earlier the entire risk was on the company itself, right? Because we had the infrastructure inside, the people inside, developed, test, right? Move to production.
Hmm.
Now we work with a lot of vendors like software vendors or infrastructure vendors like
I agree.
AWS. So we have a risk which is being shared. So
Shared.
shared risk model. So that's why the transformation, is happening right now.
Got it. And how are the quality professionals right now in the industry are dealing with this change, assuming this risk is being shared, but also if there is an audit, right? And there's a problem. Who are the auditors gonna, hold neck for? Is it gonna be the company, or is it gonna be the cloud-based software that you're using? How does that work? It seems like a very interesting place to be at.
Yeah. It's actually a very relevant question, yeah, because that role and responsibility still lies with the company.
Mm,
Whether you're working with 100 software vendors or one vendor doesn't matter, because end of day when there's an audit, whether it is internal audit or external audit from agencies, I know you rightly said the quality department is the one who's going to face it, right? So
right.
the change is their responsibility have changed because now they have to justify a lot more than previously because there are so many unknowns, right? So that is why there is a process which we do when we start engaging with a vendor called supplier evaluation, right? And quality is a big part of it. For example, if there's a software vendor providing, take an example which we were discussing before, like let's say Viva, right? So let's use
Mm-hmm.
Viva because it's a very well-known company in our industry. So when Viva now has different software like QMS, LIMS, all the different software which we use. So
Mm-hmm.
before we engage Viva or any other vendor, right, who provides the software, we do a supply evaluation of it, right, to make sure they are SOC 2 compliant. They understand the regulations. There are no, security lapses, things like that, right? So there is a trust we need to have about the vendor, right? Maybe if they have done similar implementations hundreds of companies, then we have more trust, right? So that
Right.
supply evaluation is a key component of the way we do work today. So once that is done, when have a trust of the supplier, then we do configurations on their supplied software and
Mm,
quality. Now, you know, instead of checking at the last, right, when the system goes to live, now they are part of the equation from the beginning, right? From the supply evaluation, how we write the requirements, how we build it, how we test it, right? Now they need to have the full understanding, full life cycle approach. That's why life cycle approach is one key term you will see in most of the GAMP and other guidance, which basically tells you like you need to have understanding from start to end. Now, if a quality, right, has that understanding, then they are better equipped when they face these internal or external audits. So that is a key role. And most people don't understand this, but and people think quality is just a quality check at the end of the product, right? Like if,
yeah.
that's not the case anymore, right? So for people who are working as a QA or quality organization, it's a very interesting times. If if you're really interested in learning the new tools like AI, cloud, all stuff, they can actually
Right.
have a great career.
Yeah, because right now I see a lot of anxiety around, audits and regulations, especially with the CSA coming in and with the quality professionals, as we spoke about. So, what do you think can change in the mindset of the people or the company doing it? Can we do it thoughtfully so that we can kind of mitigate this feeling?
Yeah, so I would say it is the other way, really, because if you really look at from an overall perspective, right? Earlier,
Hmm.
you only had this much amount of data, which is within your company, right? So you only know
Yeah.
certain things, and you know certain things, and the knowledge and the use cases are all within limited to a company. Now you're dealing with multiple suppliers, and for example, they will have their own industry best practices, right? If you're working with a trusted. So, for example, I have been part of a recent audit, right? So it was
Hmm.
very clear. The auditor said, "Hey, I'm going to audit your system, right? These are 10 things or 20 things I'm looking for, right?" And the first step for us was, okay, out of the 20 things, what are things which we own? Meaning the things which we created. What are things supplied with the vendor? So we reached out the vendor, right? And we did the analysis and find out, okay, these things are there. And sometimes, as an example, right, if you work with bigger vendors these days, and these companies have been in the industry, or associated with the industry for more than a decade now, like Viva, AWS, all those big companies, which means their documentation is also really good, right? You can find everything, right? How they store data, how they transform the data, whatever they do, right? And they also have internal QMS, for example, internal quality management system. Because coming back to the earlier discussion, where I said, supply evaluation, one of the key question is, hey, what is your engineering principles? Do you follow
Hmm.
um, ISO standard, good engineering principles? How do you develop this software? Do you have a QA team inside, right? What do you do when you find a defect, right? Show me the traceability from your requirements. Same thing, right? So we do all
Right.
those things, which means you have more documentation available for you to justify. So that's why I said, quality folks, and what you just mentioned about the feeling is absolutely right, because I work with a lot of quality folks in my day-to-day life, and I had opportunity to work with the great QA leaders in the past too. But what I understand with all the changes, this is one department or people who, if they can focus on learning all these things and start reading these documents from vendors and trying to understand and get the with AI, it's easy now, right? You can get
Hmm.
summary easily. So the more you actually prepare yourself, they have a better, posture for for audit right now. So my thought is that they should feel the other way, like they should actually feel good about it, because now they have more evidence to support
Hmm.
what they are going in front of the auditor. So that
Interesting.
plan we want to look at.
I hear you, Srijit, and it seems like these systems are formed over time, right? The the trust that they have formed in the industry itself, it might have taken some time, some data, to support it. So I'm talking about now they have an economy, a microeconomy within the industry. How can another partner who wants to be a part of this can join in and be a part of this economy now as a new company who wants to give service and not just relying on these two or three top suppliers that we have right now? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I'll give an example from my own life. I have also worked in startup, companies where we used to work with smaller vendors because they don't have the
Hmm.
budget to kind of, what a bigger company would charge them, right?
Right.
So the process and the questions we ask remain the same, right? What is your internal process? Whether you're a big company or small company, right? You ought to have good engineering principles within your company, whether you're a 5 member, software company or a 100 member, right? In fact, it is easier if you have it. Now, I'll give you an example. So, you know, to the earlier one, which I said, one of the questions we asked, hey, do you have an internal QMS? Now, a smaller company, software development company or service company may not have it, right? But
Right.
they may not even know what is a QMS means, right? Because they are
Hmm.
starting, right? Now, what I did in my that experience was educate them on, hey, these are the 5 things we look for. Your product is good, and we really
Right.
like it, right? We want it because it is reasonable price and it has
Hmm.
got the features which we want, right? But you still need to meet certain things. if you want to work in this industry, because we are a highly regulated industry, like financial industry, right?
Right.
Because we have to adhere to the regulation. So, and it is about educating them. And my role in that particular program was an advisor. So I was able to
Mm.
act as a person in between the company and this services company. So I
Right.
advise them, hey, you need to have it famous. We don't have. They had ISO and all this stuff because that is something which they are already aware of, right? Most of the companies are ISO certified,
Right.
but you can also buy, subscribe to QMS systems, right? So they subscribe to QMS from another company, right? And implemented that, right?
Mm.
And it is just about showing up in a process that you have a process to follow, right? You cannot just, the idea is like if you buy something, they cannot just change the code one day,
Right.
right? Something
Mm.
else because it is going to impact. So those are guardrails we want to make sure, right? And whether you're a smaller company, it doesn't matter. They have now access to, as I mentioned, they can subscribe to an outside vendor's
Right.
QMS, yeah,
Hmm.
and still be compliant. So it is possible for small companies
Mm.
as well.
Okay. And when we talk about smaller companies, Sreejith, small companies and also working on advanced therapies, for example, right? They have very limited resources when you talk about the validation system budgets itself that they have. So, what would your recommendations be to those companies? Where can they focus the capital when it comes to CSA? Do you have any advice to them for them?
Yeah. So for small companies, it's actually, easier because when I quit a big pharma, right, to do my own consulting, I really wanted to work with the smaller companies. So that's one
Mm.
of the reason I quit my, job in 2021 and then started consulting for smaller companies. Because with smaller companies, the good thing is that you don't have the legacy of a lot of systems behind you, right? So you don't have those many layers to go to take a decision, right? That's a good thing about it. You can make decisions because there are only few players in the game. That's one. On CSA aspect, CSA is actually perfectly fit for smaller companies. The reason being, the CSA change is about do risk-based validation, right? Meaning don't overdo things, right? So I'll give you the 4 steps and then, it will help you understand better, right? So the 4 steps in CSA is take a requirement, right? And look at the requirement and think, okay, if this requirement fails to function, right, as its intended use, will this impact patient safety, product quality, or data integrity? That's one question we ask, right? Because immediately the SME can tell you, okay, this feature is very critical. Let's say, we are using it to label a medicine, right? So the label 10 mg, 1 mg, whatever is very critical because it cannot change. It will harm the patient's life, right? Let's say that's the software. So it's very critical. Now let's say we are using it for a learning management system, right? So it is not that critical. It is for the internal use, right? So immediately they can identify this particular requirement, high, medium, and low. That's first check. Second, what we do is we check, okay, how is it implemented? Is it custom developed or did we buy it from a, reputed vendor, right? So called out of the box feature, right? Just like a phone, right? It comes with all the software inside, right? And we just customize by changing the screenshot to your dog or whatever, right? But all the other things, apps comes inbuilt, which is already tested, so you can safely use that. Similar to that, there's a second check. Now what we're trying to do is we're trying to gauge the risk here, right? Okay, less risk to the patients and less risk because it's already tested by the vendor. Now we can now categorize this requirement using these 2 steps as high, medium, and low. And if it is high, then we say, okay, do more testing. Low and medium, do less testing. And then there are testing methods called unscripted testing, all the stuff, right? Now, this approach was shared by Computer Software Assurance, which came in, 2022, right? And risk-based approach is not new. I'm just saying this particular CSA approach is, I'm talking about, right? Using this concept, a new company in the example which you just mentioned, they can clearly say, okay, I need only these 10 features. Because if you really look at a small company and a big company, bigger company will have more functions within the company, more sites, more people, more processes, right? Small company, not that. So they may need only 20% of what a big company needs. That 20% may be already coming as out of the box from the vendor, a trusted vendor. Now, what is the risk now? The risk is very low because I'm getting everything what I need. I don't have too many complications, right? And if the vendor has already tested, I can leverage that documentation, meaning I can ask them, they will provide their testing evidence, right? So I have everything, documentation is also ready. So only I have to do minor configurations, which I can do testing. So immediately what has just happened is you have reduced the testing scope to minimum, right? And if the risk is low, very minimum. If the risk is high, then yes, you do. So, you can compare this to a bigger company where they have hundreds of testers or validation folks. Now you can actually do this work with, 2 or 3 people, right, within your team. So the effort has reduced because you got a software which is already validated, meaning tested and verified by the vendor. And by using the CSA approach, you just need to now document why you are not doing additional testing. That is where CSA is going to help you. So every company will have a SOP, right? We are very familiar with SOPs. Every company will have a validation SOP or a CSV SOP. So this particular company, in the example which you just mentioned, they can just write in the SOP, hey, we are utilizing CSA approach, and these are the steps. Since these features are available as ready-made or out of the box, we do only minimal testing because this principle says so, right? And this is the evidence. We have captured the evidence from the supplier as part of supplier evaluation, and these are the additional testing we do. That's it, right? So it is very easy. Now, the reason I say that is easy now is imagine the same situation 10 or 20 years back, right? Or 15 years back. In that case, let's say you have the requirements and most likely you don't have the cloud vendor, right? So you have to build your own. So there is so much work. And your testing team is always compliance focused, meaning they're scared of quality, right? So they will treat every requirement, do a lot of testing. So you have done a lot of effort. So with this approach, you can now see that, you can get the product faster, still compliant and have a good quality. I hope
Right.
that
No,
again helps.
it does help a lot, and it kind of also allowed me to think how CSA can also be misapplied in a way that, okay, we understand it is a risk-based approach, but how does it not allow people to maybe over-engineer or, do under documentation? How does that work, or how do we get rid of that dilemma?
Yeah. So there is this key word in that, entire concept, which is again, people have misunderstood. So it's called undocumented. Okay. So one of the thing, when CSA was shared by FDA, and all the proponents of they said, and I mentioned unscripted, right? Unscripted testing is a concept they also introduced to this. I mean, it's not a new concept; it's a testing concept, but to this validation concept came along with the CSA, where people thought unscripted means, right, not documented, and that is not true. What they try to emphasize then is unscripted is just a type of testing. It is still documented. So unscripted does not mean undocumented. So to what you just asked, you still have to document, right? What I'm saying is that, give you an example, right? What is an unscripted and scripted difference? So let's say you have a requirement and you have classified it as high risk, right? Now, what the type of testing you typically would do is positive scenarios, right? You understand, right? Positive scenarios is, okay, let's say let's take an example, right? So let's say it's a QMS application where you have to log in, enter some data, and let's say quality logs. The document has to move from draft to effective, right? So you use that is a positive flow, right? Log in, enter data, push it for review, approval, and get it to effective, right? What is the negativity? Then we do negative testing, which is try different logins, try rejections, right? Try to break the system. So you do a lot of testing for high risk, whereas for low risk, you just do one positive. So in the example which you just mentioned, they just need to do that, one positive scenario and document it. And what they're trying to say is earlier you have to document it so the scripted and unscripted main difference is effort is significantly less because when you're scripted, you do log in here, click here, do this, do this, do this. Whereas unscripted, you can just give a objective for the test case and say, hey, I'm going to test this, right? These are all my law requirements. And this is the way I test. You don't detail how you test it. It's up to the tester, right? So the tester really does real testing because that is what he or she is supposed to do, right? To test and find defects instead of right in the steps. So they do their testing, and then if they find a defect, right, then they write about it. If they don't, they say pass. So it's very easy with unscripted, but you still document because you still say objective of the test, right? You say what all scenarios you did, if you find some observation, and then you follow GDP, good documentation practice, which is capture the name of the tester, capture the time at which this was tested, right? Initial date, all those, typical stuff we are very familiar with. So
Yeah,
yes,
no,
yeah, I just want to clarify that it's not undocumented. It's very important to understand.
right. It's just so when you talk about the risk, right? On like this is risk, this is low risk. Can it be subjective as per the operator or company, and can it be different for FDA regulators when they look into that particular topic?
Yeah, so it could be, right? Because everything is subjective. But what you then do is if you have that kind of doubt, and then we need to then understand how do we decide, right? One of the questions this auditor would ask is, okay, you say this is high, this is low. How did you arrive at it? Right? It has to be based on some scientific principle, right? So the four steps which I mentioned to you, right? It's a scientific process. Now, in that, if you look at the first step where I said, okay, does this feature, if it fails to operate, has an impact to patient safety or product quality? Who knows that? The SME, right, the business user who actually provided the requirement knows how critical it is, right? So it is very important to include all those stakeholders in this discussion to decide the risk. Now, what you're going to show as an answer to that auditor is, hey, yes, we decided risk is high, because we had this discussion involving this business SME, the QA, the CSV, the IT guy, right? Everyone who is involved in making the decision, and it is documented, right? So that is how you prove and show that, okay, this was not a person's judgment, right? And that is the problem with some of the other, risk mechanism we used to use before, where, you know, mostly in some system, at least in my experience, we had requirements, and then the IT folks, would decide, right? And then your question becomes really valid, because you cannot really say, because it is your subjective understanding the risk now. And that's another thing, right? I always encourage the QA to be part of this discussion as well, because from day one, if they're part, and they can raise, hey, you're saying, hey, business, you're saying this is risk medium, but I see a problem with this, which is it is not gonna meet this particular regulatory, GXP requirement, right? 21 CFR Part 11 or 820, whatever they see, right? So that quality then can bring that. So that is why it's very important to bring all these stakeholders and arrive at that. And then, at least in my experience, what I always suggest, if you feel it is between medium and high, select high, right? So you actually reduce the risk of this issue, because all you will do is do some additional extra testing, but it is going to help you achieve a better product quality. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. A lot of cross collaboration when you're doing risk assessment and where this actually fits in. It's really good with especially CSA when you're checking in on if this actually requires rigorous testing or not for a particular system or for a particular process, right? So, what is the feeling of federation right now, FDA? How are they looking at CSA at this point, and how much they have already taken up uh, that particular way of thinking for the system validation.
Yeah. So the CSA was published by FDA, right? It's a draft guidance published by FDA's, internal organization dealing with this, right? So it is the current thinking. So, you know, you and I know this, right? In our industry, we have this term is called um, FDA's current thinking, right? In all these regulations, you will see that term where they say, hey, this is our current thinking on this particular topic. So if you read these latest AI draft guidances they published earlier this year, they'll always say this is our current understanding. It's very important, because now we are in December, right? Now we will look at that and say, hey, a lot of things have changed, AI, right? Some of things may not make sense, but that's why they put that wording, right? So when FDA published their CSC, also they said this is our current thinking on this particular subject. And because it was a draft guidance at that point of time, 2022, which became final in September, right? and typically guidances are not made that final. So some people I know like were even surprised that it came final in a couple of years. Having said that, we also have to look at the other industry or documentation of best practice. So GAMP, I know you're aware of it. GAMP was revised in the same year, 2022, June of 2022, right? So GAMP included some of these concepts like critical thinking, things from this into their guidance document, right? So you can see that it's a industry and FDA are trying to think alike, or they have already collaborated. In fact, the FDA CSA came as part of a panel, which was a collaborative effort between industry and FDA, because they don't take decisions on their own, right? They also collaborate, ask for feedback because there are things which they don't know as well, right? So they always so with that understanding, um, it is very clear that they are also thinking that. That is one aspect. The second you can also think is if you're closely watching the news around the FDA, like if you remember, like earlier this year, I think yeah, after the new administration, right, a lot of layoff happened in FDA, right? And but they also introduced an AI called Lisa, right? Now they have started using it for review, right? And they have their own internal AI, which means that is the current thinking. They are technology, right, driven right now, right? Now, when FDA or the agency itself, like a government itself, is going modern, right? The industry knows, okay, that's the path we should go, right? So it is very clear if you look at these two, right, examples, is that this is something which they have their blessing on. In fact, I'll give you one more my own experience. I think earlier in 2024, I was presenting for a RFP bid at a large company for one of the company I partner with, and we won that bid. But one of the key question I remember the quality person asked that, hey, because I was saying like you can actually save this much effort and money if you move from CSV to CSA approach, right? And they asked me this question, hey, the guidance is only draft, like how can we implement it? In fact, that during those times, the FDA folks were involved. They were trying to socialize. This is our current thinking, right? It will take some time to become final, but you can implement. In fact, even before that, I myself have been involved in process where we actually implemented. All you need to do is, revise your SOP, include these elements, and refer that, and say this is the approach. And then now that it become final, the question is not valid anymore because it is there. But yeah, so I just want to share that as well because
Yeah.
most people have these questions.
No, and I'm glad you brought that up because the next question that I had is Federation is taking it up really well. We know that because they are passing all these rules and traps and whatnot. But what about the quality professionals right now in the industry who are having a hard time of going from CSV approach to a CSA approach? What would your recommendation be for them?
It is true. It is very hard, actually. Um, you know, um, but I think that, as I mentioned before, they have to look at this as an opportunity. Um, I'll give one more example from my. So when I started my career, I worked with a QA. I mean, I was the CSV guy, and I had a friend who was a QA person, right? We were friends, but he used to reject all my documents because he has to follow certain things, right? And then after 15 years, when I left, I was going to meet him, and then I said, I'm leaving, and he said, okay, good. Um, and I asked him what changed, right? And he showed like this change, like he was pointing to his monitor. So what he was trying to say was he had four monitors, okay? And when we started in 2007, he had only one, right? So all he was trying to say, I have more documents to review. That was his thought, that was his what trying to convey, right? And this is before CSA and all the, new stuff happening. But that is the reality, right? And even now, you see a lot of technology trends happening. And typically our industry, right, life sciences, are slow to adapt because we always look at technology sector, financial sector. But AI is different because out of the top, if you take top three use case of AI, pharma is one, right? Creating these medicines faster for the patients, right? And because of that, you can see a lot of IT folks have already transitioned to AI automation and all the stuff, but QA is left behind because it's not their, primary area of focus, right? So that's why I say it's a great opportunity if you're in that field. If you can be that person who, travels with this trend, learn all these tools. Because I interact with a lot of QAs and I kind of encourage them as well in my team to, hey, learn AI, reading this vendor documentation, learn how to use, most of the companies have ChatGPT, enterprise ChatGPT, right? Or any of the other AI tools, most companies, they can use this to summarize some of the documents. So this small use cases, we start look at some test, because some of the work they do is very mundane task, which is looking at the test cases, finding errors, right? You can just feed it and get that result in 5 minutes instead of spending it one day, right? So to my friend who had that 4 monitors, I don't know if he's here in this today, but if he's in that still phase, his job has really simplified. I mean, on those aspects. Now he can really focus on the bigger things, which is, hey, is this system meeting these regulations? He can ask those bigger questions and, have some time shaved off from the, the boring stuff, which takes him hours to do, right? So it's really, that's how I want to look at it, right? It's a great opportunity for those folks. But you're absolutely right. If you ask that question to any QA folks, they will say that we're not comfortable because I don't know if it's by design, but unfortunately they're not part of that transformation training and other aspects which typically IT folks get first, right? Right? And the other problem is that they typically are involved in the later stage of the project. And some of the questions sometimes, I remember myself, I've been guilty of this as well, right? Some of them, when we finally go to the go live and we just have 2 weeks and we go to QA, hey, sign this, right? They are asking a lot of questions. We are like, why are you asking so basic questions? But the answer is, you did not involve me from the start of the project. How am I supposed to know this, right? Right? With these new approaches, I think at least in my last few years, I've been really, vocal about including them in the initial stage. That's why the risk profile I mentioned, if they are part of the risk profile, on day one they understand these requirements. Now they know these are things which are going to implement. So now they can track the process like a life cycle. So when we get to the go live, they're a better informed person and they can ask the right strategist
Yeah.
questions to you, right? So it's a win-win. But you are right. That's a department which has not got that attention that it needs to get. I think, but instead of waiting for an organization to bring that training to you, if you can be proactive and start learning, then it's actually a great opportunity for them.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought up AI in our discussion, and you have been doing it for a while. And I wanted to jump into this section of our talk where we are talking about AI and how is it impacting validation industry in itself. And we know that AI is entering validation at a very fast pace, right? What are the biggest near-term impact that you are seeing right now in the industry that you are in, and that people should not just talk about but also implement in action?
Yeah. So I don't know really like across the industry, right? All the use cases, right? Which is because it is still a developing thing. But I can tell you what I've been doing, and these are use cases which I teach my students as well as someone who is listening is there. They can implement it today. So I'll tell you an example which I did recently. So if you're a computer system validation professional, one of the 70% of your time you spend on understanding the requirements and writing the test cases for that, right? The test cases which are adhere to the company's template, best practices, blah blah blah, right? So that is your primary focus, and testing and finding defects, right? That should be your primary focus, but most of the 70% is done on the making that documentation beautiful, right? Um, so what I did recently was I created a custom GPT, okay? Um, And since the company had access to GPT, enterprise GPT, I created a custom GPT, two GPTs. One, I fed all the company's relevant SOPs, procedures into that. Now it understand, okay, this is how I should work. I gave it the template. This is the how I will write requirements, right? and this is how I should write test cases. Once I have fed it with internal data, right? Now I said, okay, this is my system. These are my requirements. Give me positive, give me all test scenarios as a validation tester. So immediately you get that, right? Now, immediately what happened is that as a human, as a one person, you can have blind spots, right? And that's a blind spot which will carry to the production a defect, and then you again have to bid, right? It costs money. So now, if you can think, if I give you a requirement, Jainesh, and if you can think, okay, if you're a good tester, you would be able to think like 10 scenarios or 20 scenarios based on your experience. But AI can give you 100, right? So you cannot think that, or it may take you a few days. So you just got 100 scenarios and you can pick and choose. Okay, I never thought of this scenario, right? Now you just got a really great test case. So it created that first. Based on that, then I, fed it the test template and asked it to create test cases with the same, values. Now this is, I mean, it took me some time to create it, right? Of course, because I need to give the prompt and make sure that it works according to my expected things like that. But for a person who's going to, and I provide it to my team, right? For a person who's using it, if you give some person on day one, hey, these are your requirements, write test cases. That person may take a week today in today, standard. Immediately on day one, this person is feeding that to the system, got the requirements, test scenarios, got test cases. Now this person's job is to go through this review. That is where the human in the loop comes, right? That is always part of our industry and it should be part of, right? And now your job is not actually, you're not staring at a blank paper anymore, right? You have some content now already draft, like 70% in just few minutes. Your job is to now pick the critical ones and add your own experience, right? Your thought process, your critical thinking, and say, oh, okay, these are the good scenarios, these are not good. I take this, and then you take it to your reviewer and say, hey, these are things which I'm planning to do on day one or day two, right? Are you okay with that? So instead of that 1 week, you just reduce to 1 day, right? So this is one use case, and which this is something which anyone can do today if they understand some prompting and instructions, things like that. In fact, I'm doing a free webinar next week where I'll be sharing all those things because I post this mostly on LinkedIn. And the second use case is, writing requirements itself, right? If you give a system description and if you're agile, okay, give the agile template, right? As a user story kind of thing. Or if you're waterfall, give the waterfall model. The good thing about this approach, Janish, is that the output, since it is giving you a consistent output in a defined template, it is giving you less chance to get a rejection from the quality reviewer, right? Because when I created, I actually met them first and said, hey, what are the different reasons by which you typically reject requirements? What are the different reasons which you typically, reject a test case? They have their own checklist. So I borrowed that checklist and say, okay, these are things which you're looking. For example, they will tell you, you may know this, right? We don't like when you say all, right? Right? Every, like there are certain keywords which you should not use. So immediately you have avoided that and quality gets a well, well refined test case for the review, and both the people are happy now because they have to look at, hey, is this covering the requirement? Is it meeting the, regulation? Rather than focusing on spending their time on typo mistakes, bad English, things like that, right? So this is significant effort saving. Now the tester himself or herself can also got this output. They can start thinking, okay, now what are the ways I can spend to test and break the system and find more defects so that system is, bug free. And that is the focus on CSA as well, right? So if you remember the question I said on the first step, they're thinking three things. One is patient safety, product quality, and data integrity, right? So product quality is met by making a quality product. And this is how you make a product quality. So this is something which anyone can do. And so this is one use case, very simple use case, Janesh, but then, there are a lot of other use cases.
I, I'm sure there would be many use cases, and this is great, right? Because we have been using AI for validation support, but at the same time, there are also systems which are AI now. How do we validate the AI systems now? How the federation is looking into it? For example, you use this AI, you know, an agentic AI per se, if I were to name it that way. How would you verified that this is a validate system that I've been using, right? So this is just a use case scenario that the enterprise chat GPT you were using, which does not really need to, be a part of a report. But there are very many other AI softwares people are using. How are regulators looking into those kind of systems, and how are we validating them?
Yeah. So very good question, right? Because when you say AI, so there are two things, right? One is the example which I just mentioned. It's just productivity gain, right? I'm using AI tools to do certain activities which I do today. I'm just using it as a tool, right? I'm just getting a better output faster, but that's about it. That's a use of AI. But the second use case is AI is part of the system itself, right? The software, for example, is created using AI code, right? Vibe coding or whatever method you want to do it, right? And AI is present in the system, meaning it can, you have chatbot, right? And then it can read the data. So in that case, there is a guidance agency has drafted, like Jan, which came, right? So there are key things now when we talk about validating AI system itself. There are new things which we need to learn, right? One is it says context of use, COU, right? Context of use. It's like the other one where we said intended use of the system. Okay, in what context are you using this AI, right? Now let's use the two examples. In my example, so that company should have an AI SOP. Otherwise, I cannot use it, right? In my example, my company had an AI SOP where it said, hey, you can use AI for these purposes. It cannot be used for these purposes, right? It cannot be trained on sensitive data, for example, right? The data, right? The training data is very, very important, right? So context of use, right? So I should be able to define what am I using it for. That is number one. Number two is the training data itself, right? So, you know, and this is a challenge when you use vendor products, right? Because you don't know what, so, but in ChatGPT itself, I think there is a way for them to only get trained in the internal data, right? You provide, right? They don't go outside and search things like that. So you can put some guardrails on that. And that's why I'm mostly sure all the companies are using it, right? Because especially there are a lot of patient data that we have regulations around sensitive information like the PIA, right? Patient information. So yeah, so context of use is very important. The training data is very important to understand. Like, what is this train on? In my case, I can clearly say I fed it my own company's SOP. I did not take anything from outside, my own templates, and I create an output which is only for you to use. So I'm able to justify that. So training data, right? Third thing, bias. Bias is especially valid when you use it for the AI inside the system, right? How do we ensure the AI is not hallucinating, right? How do you ensure the output is verifiable? Because it is AI, every time you run it, you will get a different output, right? And one of the key terms in our industry is consistency. So in validation, right, it says intended use of the software, ensure that you get consistent results. That's why, if you know, when we do computer system validation, we test in development environment, then test environment, then prod. Why? Because we want to ensure if I give same input and test in dev and test and prod, I get the same consistent output. And that you cannot control with AI. And that is where the human in the loop concept also comes. So if you read that, I strongly encourage everyone to read that actually guidance, because it is introduce all these terms. Because when you use AI and validation and other stuff, you need to learn new things and you have to implement in new ways. Your old approach will not work, because context of use, bias, training data, all these are very important now, right? Consistent result. Now, consistent result, I think it's like a sampling approach. If you are very familiar with data migration projects, right? What you do is, let's say you have 1 million records to, um, you know, transfer from one old system to legacy to new system, right? You cannot test all the 1 million. So there is a table. It says, if you have this many millions of records, this is the minimum sample size you should test. And this minimum sample size should produce 99% of, yeah, exactly. Right. Similar to that, there are guardrails being built, or as part of the AI framework. You can, I think most companies use a framework. I forgot the name. There is a framework, industry standard framework, which has certain elements, right? Which you put some guardrails on this. So if you can achieve this result for every input and show that, right? The evidence is very important. But
Mm.
in our industry, they have clearly said human in the loop is very, very important, right? Without this, you cannot. So that is there. So you have the quality, or who is the final authority to always review the output before signing off. So that is how we will use AI. So this is a very developing area. Chinese, a lot of use cases still coming up. As I mentioned, the uses which I told you, uh, is the simplest, and even that use case is not being done by many companies right now, right? So at least in the validation side of things, right? So you have not seen so many AI ML systems being built because of these things, because we have only few regulations at this point. There is this EU AI Act, right? And then EMA has also come up with AI regulations, and the FDA has come up with AI guidance document earlier this year, right? And you and I know things are changing on a day-to-day basis with AI, right? So they cannot really have a, but and then ISP also came with the AI guide mid of this year. That's a very important document. I spoke to one of the authors of that document. It's a good friend of me from Germany. A lot of new interesting things are there for us to learn. So I will tie back this to your earlier question about how quality professionals should feel, how CSV, they all should feel excited, because this is new to everyone, right? So if you're feeling, hey, I was not promoted, right, for a long time, I'm not earning enough, right? If you can master these new things, right, you can jump ahead, right, and have a great career, because this is already happening. And people who can learn and adapt and implement this, the first, they'll be of high demand, right? So that's why I'm seeing that as well, right? So I told you, like, I have created a few online courses, right? So whenever I create a new course, I always um, write in LinkedIn, and I share a form to collect their interest, because I create based on their interest. So I created an AI, basic course in Udemy in September of this year, right? Again, this is based on their interest. So when I published this one, advanced AI kind of thing, I was just checking to validate, how much interest is there, and great interest, right? Because people are interested to learn, and that is great. Which means, like, yeah, this is the area where if you can focus and spend some time learning and adapting, then you know you can have a great career.
Absolutely. No, thanks for sharing that, because a lot of early career professionals and already professionals who are in the industry need to keep upskilling with this new era that we are entering into. And it's not just the CSV industry that it's changing a lot, many things. But before I want to dive into the skill sets of the upcoming times, I want to go into this one last topic that I had in mind was continuous validation. Sounds powerful, but also seems super vague. So I just wanted your perception on what realistically can happen
Mm.
in this side of validation.
Yeah. So this continuous validation, Jainesh, has been floating around for a few years. Okay. And even I did not understand. I mean, I'm not saying I understand it now, but what I meant to say was, when we moved from paper to digital, right, we had this continuous validation. So at that point of time, my understanding was that, okay, we validate a system and we call it as validated state, right? So it's a state at that point of time. Then what we do is we make changes to the system, right? And then we validate, right? Whenever there's a change control. So that is continuous validation, right? Continuously validate the system to make sure it meets the intended purpose. That is the understanding. Now with AI, it's a different level of continuous validation. And actually, thanks for bringing that up. Uh, I should have talked about this as well when I talked about the AI part of it, because with AI, the continuous validation is a reality now. The reason I say that, you know, earlier, as I mentioned, you have user requirements, you test it, build it, and you push it to production, and you say it's a validated state. Now, if you use AI, you cannot do that anymore. right? Because when you build it and when you test it, the outputs are always changing. So you cannot really say in dev, test, and prod, you have the same output. You will have different outputs. So what does this mean? It means if you're using AI, you actually have to know how to do continuous validation, meaning iteration, right? And that, I believe that particular term is part of the ISP um, guide, which was released mid of this year. I'm pretty sure it is there. Um, it talks about that, which means, okay, now your validation does not start when you go live. You start when you actually build the training data, right? What is the training data? What is the bias? Like what is the context of use? There are few factors, right? And when a tester test one requirement and find an output, then you need to also prove that, run it 100 times and show that there is a consistency or, relatability in those outputs, right? Yeah. So to my earlier example, it is not about, okay, I have a validated state, point of state, we call it point of state because validated state, is at a point of time, right? But now the system have to be should be in continuous validation, meaning from the time it builds to live and then continuously. It's a very interesting concept, but it's very powerful as well because with AI, I think it is finally possible. I should rather say it is important that every system will have to be continuously validated if you use AI. So the next part is how do we do that, right? I think I myself was not very clear on that because I've not done that yet. Because the guidance has just came a few months back, and people are still, as I mentioned, and not many systems are available today where it is being used as AI ML. But maybe in 2026, as we go through, we will hear this term more often, and more use cases may come up. And I hope to learn myself as well, and share with others during. But it's a concept I think is becoming a reality now because of AI. Because that's the only way you can say that you have a validated system which is using AI. Fundamental thing auditors will look is how do you continuously validate that particular system. So I think it's a very good concept. And thanks for bringing that
Yeah.
term. It's gonna be one of the key terms I believe going forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the good thing about you is you are always open to learn, even after 2 decades of experience in the CSV, CSA industry. Most people will be like, you know what, hey, I know I do this the best, and whoever needs my help can come to me, and I'll give them the support that they need. But there are very few people who are very open to learning new things and make a change in their belief system itself, because that's a really big thing, and which I feel you have done already. So I do appreciate you for that.
It's a reality actually, right? Because I don't know many things, and all of us, whether we pretend or not, there's nobody who knows everything, or even for that matter, anything, right? It comes through, certain realization, not from your professional, but also your personal life, right? So you go through certain things and then you realize certain. Because in my um, career itself, and I hope this will, be helpful for someone who's hearing this. When I came out after 15 years in the industry, and decided to do my own thing, right? I have to go deep and learn regulations. And I've heard these terms over and over the years, but you're always busy working, right? So you always think about what is right in front of you, get it done. Even if you ask me like previously, like, why are we even doing this? I may not have an answer because, okay, to get my salary, yes, of course. Other than that, right? When I attend the company conferences, when they say the CEO says, we are doing this for the patient community, it doesn't make sense to me because I'm not interacting with patients, right? I don't see any patients. How is my work impacting them? I don't know. I only know, okay, I've been given requirements. I'm helping them to put that into system and get my salary, and that's about it, right? But only when I started learning these things, fundamentally, and I started sharing with my students, and I realized, okay, because some people want some meaning in their work, right? Apart from salary, right? And then if you are in CSV, some people may ask, I really want to be in the forefront of the customer facing, or in our case, customer is patient, right? I'm not getting an opportunity. So, but it is wrong because if you take, there are a few things here, right? So, software as a medical device. I'll give you one term, SAMD. Okay, software as a medical device. It means, you can be, a phone can be a software as a medical device because it has an app which checks your heart rate. So it's a software as a medical device, right? Now, the heart rate app is tested and validated by a validation professional, let's say for a company, right? So if that person can now think that, okay, if I did a mistake, the person's right uh, patient is affected, right? So I have that indirect or direct relation or connection to the patient. So once you start thinking that, then you'll also have interest in some of these topics to learn more, and why these regulations came, why did FDA think like that, right? So when you ask those questions, then that's when, so I keep asking those questions, and when AI comes, right? So also, right, other thing is, um you you if you want to do a good job at what you're doing in your current work, it is not enough to learn everything in that within that. uh, I'll tell you why I'm saying this, right? AI, for example, right? I use a lot of AI for my writing. I have wrote a book, but that I did not use AI. But my post, my newsletters, I use a lot of AI because I write and then I use AI to edit it or structure it, right? To make a LinkedIn under the balls or whatever, right? So that is one. I do a lot of AI movies, right? So I learned AI movies. So I do a lot. So I have to learn prompting and learn, how to generate an image and vision and all the stuff, right? So there are a lot of work which I do outside of my current work. And now when I come to my work, and when I thought, okay, let me build a custom GPT, right, for helping write test cases better. So that training which I did outside of my work helped me because now I know kind of prompting a little bit. So I can use that knowledge and apply. So, I mean, if you want to speak to like professionals who are entering or even experience, one of the key takeaway for me, at least from my experience, is learn outside your domain of work and bring that to your work. You will see, like, fundamentally, you'll change the way you are looking at things. So that is why I tell you, right? Uh, being an expert is all BS. Nobody's an expert, right? But there are a lot of expert people. If you look at my LinkedIn, there are a lot of hate comments I get from so-called experts. Um, but if an expert, you're stuck, right? If you're not learning, like we talked about a lot of about quality folks today. We talked about AI, new stuff, right? So if you're an expert, nobody's an expert in AI today, right? So if you don't put your learner's hat and continue learning, expertise will not have any value. So that's a very, very fundamental understanding we all need to have. I think that's why we are even having this conversation, right? Even, you know, when I read some of the regulations, even now I cannot understand. So I have to Google and find out what does it really mean, right? So
Absolutely. We are all students of life, right? And you have to keep growing, keep learning if you want to stay ahead of the curve. And also it's just out of interest. If you're really interested in something, uh you would want to ask more questions on, oh, why this is, why do we do things in a way that we do right now? That's what I do. Not a lot of people like me when I ask a lot of questions, but I mean, I want to understand why do we have this practice right now? So so no, thanks for saying that. It's very powerful. And
I want to respond to that, Jainesh. Like I have this question actually, because I've been talking a lot, right? I want you to talk a little more. So why did you start this podcast, by the way? Like what was your drive behind this?
my drive behind this is to so initially Bags2Riches, where it comes from, is I've seen a lot of international students, professionals, who come in with just two bags and a dream, right? They come to an international land, start from scratch, very beginning, and they have the thrive, they have the passion, they have the courage to do that and make it in life. And I feel very empowered when I listen to those stories, especially. And being a life tech, life science professional now, I feel this is my calling. I like talking to people. One-on-one conversation is, I would say, is my strong suit. Strong suit. So I enjoy conversation. I love to learn a lot. And that's why I bring on industry professionals as well as people who are helping students outside of their own jobs and empowering them. So, my only reason that I want to do this is to bridge the gap between the romanticizing of your life in US to the reality of its life. So whenever you're coming in, you have this, fantasy, or what, this is how life would pan out to be. But unless you understand your own calling on what you want to do, I don't think you can ever be that fulfilled or satisfied in your life. And that's why I like talking to people and understand their perspectives on what life is and how they find purpose in what they do. So that is my understanding, and that is what really allows me to thrive. Outside of work, I love doing this, and that's why I just talk to a lot of accomplished people like yourself, and talk to them about what they did differently, what can the new people coming in can do differently, and things of that sort. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's very interesting because you're not a family man yet, right? And you're doing this on a Sunday. I used to do a lot of cricket on Sundays. If you're doing it on Sunday, I can assume like you're really passionate about doing this. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I might do that as well. I might go and play cricket as well after this. So I enjoy living my life. I don't want to be uh uh, like a 9 to 5, define who I am. I really want to understand uh what I want to do in life and what would really fulfill my heart and satisfy my heart. So that's my own journey that I'm trying to explore while doing this, and hopefully it will give me a sense of it. But coming back to our conversation, I had one final question for you, and we can call it a close. What do you think is the future of validation roles with the AI coming in, and from your 2 decades of experience that you've been in this industry? What do you feel is the future?
Future of validation, right? So AI is gonna play a big role on it. That is for sure, right? Um, then risk-based critical thinking, right? That is a human power. It's not so two things I mentioned. One is AI, one is human, right? Risk-based critical thinking. That's the second part is what was lacking in all of us, right? And every work which we do, if we can start critically think, okay, why am I doing this? Am I overdoing this? Am I doing it for somebody else? Right? Am I doing it as per the regulation? Am I doing it to satisfy somebody's ego or somebody's discretionary, likiness, right? Or is it really required? If you don't ask those questions to yourself, and these are all human questions, right? Most people think AI will replace jobs and all this stuff, but it is just a small part of the story. But eventually, humans, right, need, right? There are human skills yet to be mastered. Um, the reason I say all these things, Jainesh, is um, over the what I have learned, almost 10,000 plus students in the last 5 years. Right, it was not planned, but through my courses and people call me or ask for guidance and things like that. So and I myself have a lot of bias, right? Even today, right? Bias about few people in other countries, things like that. Now I have students, for example, in Pakistan, and different countries around the world where my perception of people were different. Now it has changed, and I understood like we all need the same thing, right? Yeah, we all want, as you mentioned, like purpose, the calling, or fulfillment, whatever you want to call it, in our own different ways. So once you start talking to these thousands of people across, I have students in Argentina, Latin America, in Africa, India, Asia, US, UK, a lot of countries now. Yeah, so I understood like it's all the same. Like we all have the same passion, same thought process, but they were all struggling, right? That's why they have reached out to me for whatever reasons, right? They thought this person is two steps above, uh, in front of me, so maybe he can have some insight which I can use in my life. That's about it, right? And we all do that, right? But fundamentally, what I understood is there are human skills yet to be developed. which is the thing which I said, right? So, for example, the reason I say like I run few programs every year. Okay, I did a 12-week program. And I selected 10 top 10 students across the world this year, and I decided, okay, because I don't know if you read, I wrote a post yesterday or day before in LinkedIn where in the last first 2 months of this year I didn't have a job. So and then what I did was I went in deep learning mode and came out of it, and I got a better role because I wanted to learn those skills, and then I want to do those skills in my new right. And I want to share that when I did that top 10 program, I told them with one promise. I said like I have learned few things now, which is very very relevant in this industry right now, and by end of 12 weeks my hope is that all of you 10 people will get jobs because I only selected based on questions and in interviews things. I did interview more than 70 plus people applied, and you wouldn't realize I had a student who got a job double his salary in week one, and I was doing one weekly session plus daily interactions. But my idea was like if I share everything I know and teach them certain things in 12 weeks. But this person had everything. In week one, I always start with mindset. Mindset. In my courses also, you'll see first module is always about mindset. This person only needed that. He had all the skills, he had everything, but there's fear and things like that, which are human things, right? I'm trying to tell you like humans. So if you focus on human skills, if we focus on doubling down that, right, along with learning new technology, those are the two things. I know it's sorry, it's a long answer, but I really wanted to share that because fundamentally what I have understood, at least in my life, talking to this and my own person, it's not that difficult. It's all internal, um, internal things, which if we can learn how to master this human things, a lot of things are possible. And I'm not just saying for cliche purpose, but I have seen the results, right? And when my student gets a job twice his salary in week, when I myself don't know why, right? It's not me. I may have shown him a path, but I don't know if that is the only path he required. Maybe, right? And then some people need something else, right? So it's all unique. But what I have understood is all almost 99% it was human skill set, which was lacking. Like some fear, some confidence issue, you know, some confusion, right? Bringing that clarity. Or maybe some people just want to talk. If you talk to somebody, that's it. They're good to go, right?
Yep.
So it's all human to human, right? But if you can combine that with the latest technology, which is AI in this case, that's how I think we all will excel. I think that's the future of validation. I'm just trying to remember what the question is. The question was about future of validation. It is combining this human skill set, and that's why all this guidance are talking critical thinking. It's not nothing
Mm,
new. In for thousands of years, why would a guidance document in 2025 focus on critical thinking? There is a separate section on critical thinking in the GAMP guidance, right? There's nothing to do with AI. It is all human. So I think we just need to focus that plus technology. And I believe that's the future of validation.
gotcha. So if I were to kind of summarize it, it's going to be use of AI technology and allowing your critical thinking to take the front seat, uh, and kind of having those both in combination can give you an edge in the CSV industry. And plus, of course, getting over the old mindset and trying to get into the news of things, basically. Awesome. Yeah, thanks. All right, Sreejith. Yeah. And I feel those were all the questions that I had for you. Any questions that you might have for me?
I think I had one question which I already asked him, right? Apart from that, right now I don't have any other questions. But what I want to share with you and everyone here is like I'm available. If there are any discussions related to this topic or life in general, um, happy to share if I know something. Right. That's about it. I think you're doing fantastic job, Janish. Not because you're doing podcasts or anything, but it's about doing what you want, right? For example, in my life, I right now I'm doing what I want, but it took me a long time to, even started to realizing that I can have that life, right? So, um, you're a young guy, so really appreciate because the opportunities in front of. I mean, think about it, right? You and I are looking at a screen right now, right? And when I was a kid, we can only do this if you're a TV person or something, right? Today you can do this for free, right? So you're utilizing that opportunity, and that's a gift, right? In the world we are living in. So I think if you can take, I mean, not an advice or anything, but if you can take your eyes off the views or what this brings to you, but if this is something which you really like to do, I would like to listen to your future podcast. I did listen to few to prepare for this one. To be frank, I did not go through everything. I really like a couple of those episodes which I watched. So I would spend my time to watch more in the future. So keep doing what you like to do, Jay. That's
I
how.
appreciate it, Sreejith, and it's gonna happen when it's gonna happen. I do not have any expectations out of this. This is for my personal, oh, okay, I tried. Even if I failed, I tried, right?
It is no failure. It's
There
no
is no,
failure.
and I mean, you wouldn't, like, you wouldn't really, when I talk to people, people like you, and I've been in touch with through this particular platform, I've been in touch with such an amazing people, and I have so many connections that allows me to look at the industry in general differently, allows me to have a different perspective of life in general. So, that's way beyond what any likes, subscribers, or anything would give me. So I really like doing this. I love having these conversations, and I love having people like you on this platform. So I do appreciate your time, and thanks for all the kind words that you had. And yeah, with that, if you don't have anything to add, I would just say this has been a pleasure, and I would love to talk more about this later.
I need to go back to the dog duty now.
Of course you do.
Yes, yeah. Thanks for your time as well.
I do
Hope.
appreciate it as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Take care. Okay. Bye.